Oh my god. Oh my god, they're here. The racist robots. They've been all around us and we didn't even know it. The black agenda, they tried to warn us. The systemic racism that was formerly the realm of police, prosecutors, and judges is now codified in the algorithm of machines that have been programmed by racists on a mission. A writer from Peaked says, humans have been trying to predict the future for eons. Our ancestors read stars or tea leaves looking for signs. These days we talk about scientific concepts like p-values and Bayesian inference. But too often these phrases have more in common with discredited practices like phrenology, a Victorian pseudoscience that hypothesized. Peebs magazine talks about a crime prediction program that turned out to be a white supremacist. Quote, any attempt to curb the alarming rate of homicides in Chicago is laudable, but the city's new effort seems to ignore evidence, including recent research from members of our super serious professional police study team at the Human Rights Data Analysis Group that predictive policing tools reinforce rather than reimagine existing police practices. Their expanding use could lead to further targeting of communities or people of color, and by color I mean the color brown. The Guardian, interviewing Joanna Bryson, has been trying to guard against this as well. Quote, a lot of people are saying that this is showing that AI is prejudiced. No, this is showing that we are prejudiced and that the AI is learning it. But Bryson warned that AI has the potential to reinforce existing biases because, unlike humans, algorithms may be unequipped to consciously counteract learned biases. A danger would be if you had an AI system that didn't have an explicit part that was driven by moral ideas. That would be bad, she said. AI developing negative views about other racial groups? There must be something wrong with the computers. This is even happening with small consumer applications like FaceApp. Quote, the creators of FaceApp, a photo filtering app which uses neural networks to manipulate people's images, have apologized after it became apparent that the software was lightening people's skin tones in the app's hot mode. The company behind the app blamed training set bias for the program's tendency to lighten the skin tone and narrow the noses of its users. I don't know what to do. Nazi robots are taking over everything. Though really we're not talking about physical autonomous machines just yet. We're talking about algorithms used to make predictions and sometimes artificial intelligence programs. And there are three areas I took a very superficial look at when exploring this topic: loans, predictive policing, and criminal reoffense rates. Banks have been using risk algorithms for a long time, and one thing they get flack for is that they are less likely to give a loan and are more likely to give a higher interest rate to loans for blacks and Hispanics. This is true even when controlling for credit score and income, and it appears to be a pure racial effect. This is what is meant when Jessica Stillman at Inc.com says, quote, you can't say you didn't give a family a loan because they were black without facing a lawsuit. But many algorithms, even those employed by peer-to-peer lending marketplaces, make decisions based, in part, on race all the time. There's an interesting paper done by the Federal Reserve which looked into this. What they found is that when controlling for loan type, lender, credit score, net income, income to debt ratio, savings rate, and interest rate of the loan, among other things, that blacks are still more likely to have bad loans than whites, i.e. they're still more likely to be unable to pay the loan. 1.6% more likely to default by blacks is not very high, so it looks like the banks in general are doing a pretty good job of giving out loans in a race-neutral manner on the basis of real risk to default. If anyone is being discriminated against for a given level of real risk, it looks like it's Hispanics or Asians. But all these residuals are very, very small. The algorithm gets it right. A kind of algorithm that has had mixed results is predicting crime changes in a city and then saying where police should best put their policing efforts. Predictive policing trials done in Kent, England, and Los Angeles predicted 1.8 times as much crime as conventional methods. Following the implementation of predictive policing, there was also a 7.4% reduction in overall crime. There's also the predictive policing trials done in the Strategic Subjects List program in Chicago and the pilot program in Shreveport, Louisiana. These programs had results no different from conventional analyst methods. It's early days though, and eventually predictive policing will probably become the norm. Another algorithm under attack for being racist is the Federal Post-Conviction Risk Assessment algorithm. This is used when considering sentence length based on the likelihood likelihood a person is going to reoffend. Some of the tools used to assess reoffense risk are marital history, employment, education level, financial background, past criminal record, of course, substance abuse, criminal thinking patterns, examples being feeling entitled or rationalizing misbehavior. And what is found is that not only do these factors, properly defined, coded into a value, and weighted, predict likelihood to reoffend very well, it's also race neutral. Its accuracy in predicting reoffenses is the same for blacks as it is for whites. Now, these programs, these aren't killer Nazi robots. In fact, these algorithms could be performed by a person with a slide rule and an abacus. In principle, they don't even require electronic calculation to be used. Practice, of course, they will get so complex that you really need electronic computers. But in principle, it's just an algorithm. And it could be run by a man with an abacus, a hydraulic computer, an electronic computer, a chemical computer, or some sort of biological computer. Perhaps the arrangement of peat moss could run the algorithm. What do you notice about these race realist types? They got all their IQ charts. They love IQ because it's a quantification of the mind. Not the end-all be-all, but something useful that makes predictions, something predictively valid. An algorithm, a statistical prediction rule. You may see some flaws with IQ in all its clarity, but that's simply because it's clear at all, versus the murk or subjective perception and hallucination. This creates a strange situation where humans are more likely to trust these sort of subjective, qualitative descriptions that are far less useful for predicting the future than statistical prediction rules are. Because statistical prediction rules, in their clarity, are clearly incomplete. But the sad truth is that it's a hell of a lot better than the crap that's going on between your ears. There was a great paper entitled Clinical versus Mechanical Prediction, a meta-analysis, and it looked at statistical prediction rubrics versus expert opinion. And some of these studies were from 1961, 1952, 1958, and they're beating the experts back then way before they were being run on electronic computers. A man with a pencil at a desk filling in boxes and multiplying by weighting to create a simple index score to predict schizophrenia better than a professional evaluation. Pencil and paper, integrated circuit, what does it matter as long as the algorithm is being run? Today, you have computer scientists creating whole beings of algorithm, artificial intelligences. Yes, this being operates through integrated circuits and electronic pulses, but it's not the material, it's the arrangement. In theory, you could have a whole bunch of humans, and this being, instead of operating through neurons interacting with each other, or through circuits interacting with each other, operates through humans interacting with each other. And that's all very heady. It's all a very heady thing. But what's being revealed by these racist computers is that this equalist doctrine of biological equality between groups, or whatever you want to call it, it's just hijacking a social function in humans. Let me go back to Bryson's quote. A danger would be if you had an AI system that didn't have an explicit part that was driven by moral ideas. That would be bad. Now, sure, moral ideas, whatever. But Bryson is specifically talking about her religion of equality and imagines all the stupid and destructive ideas about equality to be some sort of moral truth. That's what she's talking about here. And when you create a being, be it self-aware or not, that's not really relevant here. When you create a being, an algorithm with a method of integrating new information so it learns on its own, it's not going to buy into equalist nonsense unless you program that in either sort of as in a hardwired way, or you program in some sort of social conformity function. If it doesn't have, as part of its programming, conformity to irrationality, or isn't hardwired to be quote-unquote anti-racist, well then it's going to be what you call racist. Because all this equalism stuff is part of an ideological conditioning program. And when this program wasn't in place and wasn't actively impressed upon whites, the whites were racist. They have to be blasted with conditioning telling them that racism is wrong. And even then it only works part way, and it works by hijacking a social conformity function that all humans have. But when you create a new algorithmic being being that doesn't have this kind of social conformity function, well, you'll see what the results are going to be. If medieval monks somehow managed to create an algorithmic being, they would likely be distraught by this being's atheism or a lack of faith or respect for the Roman Church. What kind of hubris would you have to imagine that the values that you happen to hold, values that didn't become dominant until the 1960s, are so self-evident and so universal that an algorithmic being would not only come to such values, but would distort the world around it to such a degree as to avoid this heretical or racist or counter-revolutionary description of the world?